Hey everybody. I'm going to address in this video, I think the most common objection that I've gotten over the years from people who say that they don't care for Donald Trump, but they support him anyway. It's the most common argument, but it's also, I think, the weakest argument. But I'm not bringing this up, just to be clear, to get people to stop pushing back on me. I actually love the comments that people leave on these videos, and I don't have a lot of time to respond, but I appreciate the encouragement, and I really appreciate the pushback. Like everyone else, I need to be challenged to sharpen my thinking and to find better ways to communicate. And I think it's especially important right now because this channel, I think, sits in a unique space, but it's an important one. Conservative Christians are going to decide the 2024 election, and my goal is to talk to Christians to convince people, honestly, in these videos to reject Donald Trump and the MAGA movement for the good of the country, yes, but really also for the good of their own conscience. So I can tell you from experience that it feels liberating to go into the voting booth and not support a guy who makes me feel ashamed. I decided in 2016 that if the way that we view our faith and our politics leads us to support an obviously dangerous moral degenerate, then we're doing it wrong. So now I think there are two types of people, though, who support Donald Trump. And you can decide, if you do support Donald Trump, you can decide whether you fit into one of these categories. The first group, I'd say, are people who support Trump because they like him. They've bought into his message and his tactics, and they're eager to support him again this year. And if that's you, God bless you, but I've got nothing to offer you here. I think you need something that I can't provide in a YouTube video, but I wish you the best. I'm speaking really to the second group, and these are people who know that Donald Trump is a problem, to say the least, but you might feel obliged to vote for him anyway. So here's the one argument that I hear from that type of person, from you more than any other. It's always some version of, well, you don't expect me to vote for the Democrat, do you? It's often stated a lot more harshly than that, where the Democratic candidate is portrayed in these graphic sort of terms as like the most evil person to ever live. And I do find that interesting. I think when people describe their opponent that harshly, it's almost a tacit admission that they see Donald Trump as such an obviously flawed human being that the rhetoric around his opponent has to be ramped up to 11. But here's my problem with that argument. The argument, well, you don't expect me to vote for the Democrat, do you? The short answer is we're in a primary, and evangelicals are still in this primary Donald Trump's biggest supporters. In a primary, when you have all these other candidates. And if you say, well, they weren't the best choices, then I've just got to state the obvious about that. The reason we don't have better choices is because Donald Trump has driven all the better choices out of politics, and in some cases out of the party. And how has he been able to do that? Because his evangelical supporters primary any Republicans who oppose him. So Trump uses his evangelical base to destroy his competition, and then the evangelical base sort of hold up their hands and say, well, who else can I vote for? So maybe I'll do another video sometime where I just list all the Republicans who've been driven out of politics because they dared to oppose Donald Trump. And my guess is that if you're a Republican and you're honest with yourself, you probably respected a lot of these people before Donald Trump turned on them. But back to this argument. Well, you don't expect me to vote for the Democrat, do you? That was really only an honest argument, I think, for Christians to make in 2016. In the 2016 primaries, evangelical voters were not solidly behind Donald Trump the way they are now. So when he became the Republican nominee in 2016, evangelicals could understandably say, well, I don't like him and I didn't support him, but he won the nomination, so I guess I'll support him over Hillary Clinton. I had to process that argument myself in 2016, and I ended up rejecting it I'd voted Republican my whole life, and I always saw the pro-life issue as a line I just wouldn't cross for a candidate. But for myself, being pro-life was never a qualifying issue for a candidate. I just disqualified them if they weren't pro-life. And as I looked at Donald Trump, I saw that no amount of words that he could say about being pro-life would ever qualify him to receive my support. He was disqualified on so many levels. But in 2016, I didn't support the Democratic candidate either. I went third party for president, and a straight Republican ticket otherwise, though. Now, I regret that decision after everything that we've seen from Donald Trump since then, but that's how I added everything up in 2016. But this argument that says, well, you don't expect me to vote for the Democrat, do you? Really lost all merit for evangelicals after 2016. That's because Donald Trump came into office and immediately began the most corrupt and abusive presidency in my lifetime, at least, and evangelicals became at the same time his strongest supporters. Our nation was given several off-ramps from the Trump presidency, and at every off-ramp, evangelicals stepped in to save him. So on 4 of those occasions, they saved him from being replaced by a Republican. That's the key point. They saved him by being replaced by a Republican, not by a Democrat. So let's look at those 4 off-ramps. The first, impeachment, involved Trump pressuring Vladimir Zelensky from Ukraine to take some steps to damage Trump's potential challenger, Joe Biden. Trump was withholding weapons that the U.S. had set aside for Ukraine to hold off Russia, and Trump had no legitimate right to withhold those weapons unless Zelensky did him a favor. If you're having any second thoughts at all about your support for Trump, maybe a good place for you to start is to revisit that first impeachment, especially in the light of the fact that Russia has since invaded Ukraine, and Donald Trump is quite vocally on the side of Vladimir Putin. But for the purposes of my argument here, that first impeachment was the first off-ramp that America was given to get out of the Trump presidency, and Republicans in the Senate failed to convict him. And the reason, this is what's important, the reason they failed to convict him was because they feared Trump's evangelical base. Evangelical leaders came to Trump's defense at that time loudly, and Republican senators listened to them. But if Trump had been convicted and removed, he wouldn't have been replaced by Hillary Clinton, right? He would have been replaced by Mike Pence. Evangelical Christians exerted their massive influence over the Republican Party to choose Donald Trump, who had proven himself to be unabashedly corrupt, over Mike Pence. So there's that. The second off-ramp, of course, was the 2020 primary, where Republicans could have said, okay, we supported Trump through his first term, but let's move on from this obviously corrupt guy. But they didn't. And again, because evangelicals would have rebelled. The Republicans ended up not even running primaries in a lot of the states that year. So when Christians said in 2020, well, you don't expect me to vote for a Democrat, do you? They were being disingenuous. They created all the conditions for Trump to be the nominee rather than working to replace him with someone else. So there's that. The third off-ramp that evangelicals blew by was the second impeachment after January 6th. If the Senate had convicted Donald Trump of that impeachment, they could have made him ineligible to ever run for office again, and we'd all be done with him. Instead, they came up with a bunch of pretty weak excuses for not convicting him, having to do with process or whatever. And they were cowards, yes, but cowardice has marked the Republican Party since Trump became president. The important question to ask is, why? Who are they afraid of? It's too easy to say that they're afraid of Trump. Trump's power is in his base, and evangelicals make up a huge proportion of his base. So Donald Trump was not convicted and disqualified from running again in the second impeachment because Republican senators were afraid of his evangelical base. So again, it's disingenuous to say, well, do you want me to vote for the Democrat? if you yourself played a major role in creating the conditions for Trump to join the 2024 primary field. It wasn't Democrats who'd be running in that primary, it's Republicans. Which brings us to the fourth off-ramp, and once again, evangelicals are the ones controlling the steering wheel, so we can't take it. We're at the beginning of the Republican Party primary right now, and everyone's talking about it like it's already over. And it may actually be over, but if it is, it's because of the overwhelming support that Donald Trump continues to receive from evangelical voters. At this point, I'm just appalled. I have so many family members and friends who are serious Christians of one kind or another, and who say that they plan to vote for Trump because he's better than any Democrat. 100% of them use this as their reason when they're talking to me. But the polls show that a huge percentage of conservative Christians are supporting him in the primaries over every other Republican candidate. I find it odd that 100% of the Trump supporters that I know give as their main reason for supporting him the fact that he's better than a Democrat, as though their hands are tied. But then when they're asked in a poll, it turns out he's really their first choice. So there's that. But I'm trusting that you are being honest if you tell me that the only reason you support Trump is because you're stuck with him as the nominee. And so if that's the case, then the only way any of this changes is if we reject this whole premise that we have to vote for the Republican candidate in the general election no matter what. Some of the very worst people, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Matt Gaetzes and Donald Trumps of the world, have mastered the system to the point that they know that they can turn out their most hardcore supporters in the primary, and then the sane people in the party will hold their noses and vote for the people who really make them kind of embarrassed and ashamed to support. So I'll tell you again, it feels so liberating not to be caught up in that sick system. I'll never go back to that old way of thinking. So thanks for listening.